The Curbing Cars Journalism Project is looking at all the ways we get around, and it includes automobiles, but it also includes the bike sharing programs and bicycling, walking, walkable communities, public transportation, hourly rental cars like the Zipcar program, and rides that you can just summon on your mobile device like Uber, and all the combinations that people are using. The University of Michigan has done a study which has been backed up by some other research showing that driving is down about 5% from the peak levels of 2004. So this trend predates the recession. It lasted through the recession, and even though we've pretty much come out of the recession, driving is still down in terms of miles traveled and the number of miles that you take when you make a trip.
So how much does the economy and the current job market and even technology have to do with this trend?
The economy does play a role. Transportation is the second biggest household expense behind your mortgage or your rent payment. And during the recession, we saw a lot of people tighten their belts. They wanted to find places where they could save. Another factor that's going on that's really important is the fact that teenagers are not getting their driver's licenses the way they once were. States have really tightened restrictions on teen drivers. A lot of states now say you can't drive by yourself until you're 18. And many states, I think it's half of all states, require you to take driver's ed before you can get a license. But what's complicating that is that driver's ed programs aren't taught as much by public school systems. So you have to go out and actually pay for driver's ed. And that's a big expense for both parents and for students. And another thing that we've noticed is sort of a reverse migration of people from suburbs into cities. And there's something like 60 cities around the country where there's been a flow from the suburbs into urban areas, new condominiums, new housing developments. You could see it right here in Detroit. And so if you live in the suburbs, you might have 2 or 3 cars. When you move downtown, there's only one parking space unless you choose to buy a second one. So some folks are just downsizing their family fleets and leaving the cars behind. It isn't just teenagers, and it isn't just students who graduate from college and can't get a job so they can't afford a car. It's really kind of trickling through all levels of society at this point.
Do you tend to see this more as a sustained evolution of the transportation industry, or is it just kind of like a passing fad that will disappear within the next 10 years?
What's happening is there's been federal money for new transportation projects. So we have streetcars going in a number of places in the United States: Minneapolis, Tucson, Miami, a new streetcar line in New Orleans, streetcars in Atlanta. You have dedicated bus lines which are going in, which are cheaper to do than subways. But we also have new subway lines going in New York City and Washington, D.C. And so just the fact that money's being spent on these alternative ways of transportation shows that it's likely to be sustained. And another thing is that Wall Street investors and hedge fund artists are really interested in all this new technology, and they're willing to put money into it. And anytime you've got investors willing to spend some money on it, it usually will fuel more development. I think one of the interesting things that the auto industry will have to focus on is if you can't appeal to folks just based on emotion, then what kind of an approach do you take? And also the whole issue with young drivers, even though I realize that a lot of people watching this might say, my kids love cars. Well, if you grew up in a car family, you probably love cars, and not everybody has that privilege now, so getting the message to teenagers, I think, to even just get them to get their licenses is something that automakers might want to think about looking at, because right now, I haven't noticed a huge effort by Detroit, Tokyo, Frankfurt, Seoul to get the kids to just go get a license. And that might be, I think people never thought that that would have to happen, but maybe that's an area that the car companies have to look at themselves.